At the outskirts of a quiet village, there was Holloway Grove, an isolated area incorporated between two great forest tracts. There was no noise at the new place, fresh green lawns which were well manicured, polite neighbors, and quietness. Still, beneath the veneer of postcard pretty exterior, there was a dark side to this idyllic neighborhood, observed and documented over the years. 30 years of missing without trace cases of families whose homes remained untouched in Holloway Grove. Marie, an investigative journalist, we learn was attracted to the case. While looking for missing people's cases, she came across Holloway Grove. She could not believe that no one had looked into the phenomenon. Landing on the grove, determined to get to the bottom of the matter, she carried along her recorder, camera, and notebook. Marie came in, and the children were very quiet. There were no children and went outside to play. No cars were passing. Not even the birds were seen to have sung. Something like a weight was pressing in the air, and perhaps in the house itself. Marie tried to knock on some of the doors, but none of the doors opened. Last, a woman in her 50s with the name tag Mrs. Langley nervously asked to be let in. She was the only woman in the house who had been alive during the time of the first disappearances. She nervously opened the door to let Marie in, and then she narrated to her a really horrifying story. It began 3 decades ago, Mrs. Langley added, looking anxiously at the window. The Bennetts were the first. Their house was off one night, and the next morning they vanished completely. They didn't get to say goodbye. There were no moving vans, anything like that. That was how they left their house. Everything intact, as though they had gone out briefly and got held up. It repeated itself the following year, then consistently year after year. Whole families have been exterminated to non-existence. Marie wanted to know more about it, but every time she tried to coax information out of Mrs. Langley, the woman's face turned red. Every year they are missing on the same date, 13th of December. But before they leave, the neighbors claim to hear murmurs. No, from the grove itself. Marie went out of the house was shaken and even angered up, but she did not waste time. The principal character felt that the only way to find out the truth was by staying in one of the houses alone at night. The selected house was of Grayson family that vanished 10 years prior to the events of the film. It was a time capsule of their lives. Plates piled in the sink, toys lying around on the floor, and day-to-day photographs of people wearing happy expressions on the wall. When darkness came, night enveloped the once noisy environment. Marie ate in the living room as her camera was on. She nodded. Midnight struck, then 1, and she felt utterly silly. But then, at 12, at exactly 1:13 a.m., she finally heard it. It was a whisper, or more specifically, a voice. It was the kind of sound where it is hard to tell where it is coming from and where it is going to. Marie tried to distinguish her name, but the sound was unclear, as from many people talking simultaneously. She picked up her recorder and moved, the sound increasing as she reached the door at the back. These whispered instructions brought her to the wood's limit. Beating heart, she entered it, in the gloom. The temperature dropped, and rather than whispers and soft murmurs, the voices began to become hoarse growls. Marie felt the near of her flashlight, and she was left in the darkness. She was sure she saw a shadow from the corner of her eye, then another. People began to appear out of the trees. The true shape of them was humanoid, but was in some way off. The pupils had no distinguishable features on their face. Their motion was stiff, robotic-like. Marie fell back with wide eyes of fright, since the figures were now closing in on her. "Leave," someone whispered threateningly into her ear. "This is not your place." Marie ran back to the house, and to her surprise, she really locked the door with a key. Instead, she sat on the couch, hugging herself till morning, afraid to sleep. When dawn came, she left Holloway Grove for good and never looked back. Marie went back to her office and watched the whole footage. To her dismay, the faces of the stalking shadowy figures were clearly captured by the camcorder. They waited beside the edge of the woods, they observed, and as the camera panned back to her, a whisper could be heard, "You can't escape." Marie wrote her experience, but nothing was known about what actually transpired at Holloway Grove. The neighborhood was finally bulldozed, but the missing persons cases stopped, at least temporarily. It is, however, equally traditional that the actual grove was evil, a magical arena in which the veil between the two worlds was extremely thin. Some called it a curse, others said it was a demon, a reaper that fed on the lives it took. But one thing is certain: Holloway Grove is a place that has more to do with what isn't said than what actually is, or even could be said, and perhaps that is for the best.